Welcome to Creating Connection with me, your host, Dr. T, where we will navigate being human together. We'll do this through conversations, exploring the challenges and joys of life, uncovering insights and strategies to create meaningful connections, to foster personal growth and find solace in the collective wisdom of our diverse community. Drawing from a unique blend of academic expertise and personal experiences, I will dive into the joys and complexities of aging, death, dying, grief, and body image. With a blend of humor and compassion and understanding, we will forge connections that transcend geographical boundaries and unite us in our shared humanity. When we come together, the possibilities are endless. Creating Connection with me, Dr. T, starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. T, and you're listening to Creating Connection on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour as Heather and I dive into living mindfully, mindfulness at work, and relationships, and beyond. I am so excited to welcome back my friend and teaching partner, Heather Haslem. Just going to read her bio real quick. Since she was in episode 4, so if you want to catch that one, if you haven't yet, we talked about mindful communication. But Heather's bio: since 2007, Heather has been living her purpose to support people to age well across their lifespan. This has taken her career in several different directions. She's been a wellness director at the Sanford Center for Aging, which is where I got to meet her, the director of Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, and most recently hosts a podcast and writes a blog for the Center for Application Substance Abuse Technologies at the University of Nevada, Reno. In addition, she's a coach mentor for the Chopra certification program and has a private coaching practice. There is a full bio on the episode page, so feel free to check it out. And I just want to start by saying, just yesterday I was listening to season 5, episode 10. So your podcast, what is it called, Heather?
Cassette Conversations.
Cassette Conversations. So that long name that I said at the beginning, Center for Application Substance Abuse Technologies, the shortened name is Cassette, or the acronym, is that what we call it?
Yeah.
And I was listening to episode 10 about attachment theory and social connections, and I cannot believe it's season 5 already. Would you share a little bit about your podcast and what you talk about and some of the highlights there?
Sure, I'd love to. So as you mentioned, we've produced 5 seasons at this point, and the podcast actually started because it was during COVID, and we received a grant from FEMA to provide education for first responder family members. As you can imagine, during that time, it was an extraordinarily challenging time for first responders who were going out into the community, were potentially exposed to COVID, and then potentially were bringing it home to their families. Some people even reported that they weren't even coming home to their families to help keep them safe. So we had this funding to provide education, and imagine trying to go to a training during COVID. And there's multiple kind of challenges with that in that, in first responder families or cultures, right? If it's a firefighter, they're 48 hours on and then they have 4 days off. And that's for structure fire, I should explain. Or if you're a wildland firefighter, then your family member could be gone for really 21 days at a time, and that can get extended. So we had this funding, and just getting people to be able to come to a training was challenging with the schedule, but then also with COVID. So we decided, so that people could listen on their own time, that we would produce a podcast. And so we just produced this first season, and our team loved it so much. And then we've received other funding to support, grants, I should say, to support this podcast so that it's an open source educational resource. At Cassette Learning, we really provide education for behavioral health providers, and the healthcare workforce. So really all the subsequent seasons are focused on that. So we did resilience for healthcare providers. We did a season on health equity. Our most recent season is a holistic look at mental health. And then my favorite season, I think, I don't know, I always say that my favorite season was on secondary traumatic stress. So the impact of witnessing other people's trauma.
Yes, and that's something that we don't talk about very often, and that can be in your daily life or especially in these helping professions where, they're kind of absorbing that impact and then where does it go? Because it's part of the job. And so to recognize and realize like, oh, this secondary trauma is also impacting me and how do I navigate that and how do I dive into that? So you've had some cool guests. So this is an unintended plug, but I was listening yesterday on attachment theory and social connection, and like social connection is my jam, and so hearing like these things come together is super powerful. What about that episode, or do you even remember? I mean, you've done so many.
Yeah, that was with
Yes.
Yeah.
What stood out for you with that kind of concept?
I think it's that our early life experiences impact our relationships throughout our lifespan. So if we've had challenging relationships, which the vast majority of us had challenging family structures and things happening, we have these learned behaviors that as a child, we keep ourselves safe. And we adapt strategies to feel safe. And if we don't feel safe within our family structure in some capacity, safe to express our emotions, to be who we are, to ask for our needs to be met, all of these different pieces, it really shapes the way that we interact with other humans throughout our lives.
You know me, I love a good framework. And it is powerful to think of these life experiences as like, oh, like this is impacting like how I'm at work or how I might be interacting with my relationships. And so again, you and I mean, all roads lead to mindfulness, and we'll be talking about that. But I think the biggest piece about mindfulness for me is that ability to be aware non-judgmentally. So when you're like, oh, okay, so I recognized myself in the anxious attachment, and there's reels and TikToks and things like that are really kind of snapshots of these things. But it is interesting to then. It doesn't feel so personal or like there's something wrong with me, but more like, oh, that's impacting me. How can I meet that right now? Not like just like throwing my hands up and going like, well, I'm anxious, so forget it. But actually having information to help my own growth or my interactions with other people.
And I think it's really about, as you said, all roads lead to mindfulness. And when we can develop that self-awareness to see these patterns in ourselves and go, oh, here's that, little girl who's feeling anxious because she's not feeling loved or she's not feeling a sense of connection. We can learn to have more compassion for our experience and be able to give ourselves that versus seeking it outside of ourselves. So it's really about developing this friendliness and kindness and compassion towards how we're reacting or responding to life.
Yes, I love how you said that because I did an episode on compassion and gratitude. I can't remember which episode number it was, but please check it out if you haven't. But that idea of self-compassion can be really hard, right? Because I think some people jump right to like love yourself, or the Stuart Smalley, like I love myself, or how does it go? Gosh darn it, people like love. I know. All right, we've got that 10-year gap. Okay. Or whatever. Now I'm going to get stuck on it. Don't get stuck on it. Okay. But that idea, the what?
I said it is 10 years, a decade.
A decade. But that idea of, jumping straight to like love, people are like, no way, man, like my self-talk is garbage, or like I can't do that. And sometimes it starts with like tolerance, right? Or just recognition, like, oh, I'm having this experience, like just this experience. And then like working your way into like some compassion, maybe even compassion for the fact that you can't honestly say that you love yourself, and just go like, oh, that's hard, like, because it's painful. And it is important to develop these skills for your own internal, because I think we look externally for so much, and we're bombarded, whether it's social media or all these different facets of like, oh, you should do this, you should be this. And where do you find that center? And that's like then looking inward and not looking for someone to say, oh gosh, like you're doing a great job. It's fun to hear that. It's fun to hear words of, affirmation or encouragement outside of you, but to be reliant on that is, can really throw you to the winds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm working on personally, is noticing, right? Like how much I crave that outside approval, I guess, or confirmation that I'm doing things right, or, and when I fail at something or perceive myself failing, the internal dialogue is really challenging for me. And I can just feel myself like sliding into this hole where I just want to cover my head with the blankets. I want to go to sleep. And I'm going to wake up and I'm tired and I'm cranky and I just want to go back to bed.
Yes. Yeah. So when you have that experience, what I've been noticing, and this is in my regular relationships too, right? Like I'm quicker to, either resolve something or recognize a pattern. And so it doesn't like go on for days at a time. And I'm finding that with my own journey as well, like going like, oh, like here's this tender moment. And maybe you do put the covers over your head, and and that is like a legitimate choice. And then the next step would be not judging yourself for putting the covers over your head. And I think we have these coping mechanisms, and it's not to say like because the thing I've been working on right now is this idea that perfection is a myth. It's like, oh, like if I'm perfect, then the myth is then nothing bad will happen, or my health will be great, or I will feel energized. I mean, yes, do to the best that you can to take care of this container you're in, of course. And I this weird, I need to be perfect or it's all going to go to heck, and so that idea gets shorter, right? So it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I did do this. I am a human living a human experience, and that, comes from the self-compassion work with Kristen Neff and Christopher Grummer. Grummer? Is that how you say his name? Anyways, yeah, Kristen Neff. I'm solid on that one, and her co-author. So, but that idea that, I'm having a moment, and instead of beating myself up for not being perfect or making a mistake, it's like, oh, okay, can I be tender? Can I have compassion for that? And that doesn't just change just because you start a meditation practice.
Mindfulness is like a piece of self-compassion, as we know, right? It's mindfulness in and of itself doesn't translate to self-compassion. It's just like one step of the process is being aware of it. And then it's intentionally offering ourselves some compassion, like some kindness. Oof, this is hard. Oh, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
And then it's that recognition of our common humanity too. Like, oh, and this is true to some degree for all the humans.
Right.
But
Someone in the world
requires awareness. Yeah.
Someone in the world is
Other
experiencing
people might
this.
say, nah, I don't experience that. It's like,
sure, of course not. Why would you?
Okay.
You're perfect. No, it is interesting, and to watch the habit patterns of the mind and how we kind of weave them in. And so With that, I want to transition and ask you a little bit about, we say all roads lead to mindfulness, but how do you use it in your work? Like, how does it come into like your workday? Maybe not specifically when you're teaching mindfulness, but in other aspects, your coaching, your other.
Specifically in my coaching is where I would say it's most prominent. So it's even a key skill or a key competency for health and wellness coaches, as well as for our Chopra coaches that I mentor. And that is the ability to be present with your client. And in my opinion, that is the greatest gift we can give another human is our presence.
Yeah.
So often, people are physically together, but mentally, other people's minds have drifted somewhere else. And so in my coaching practice, the client is my meditation practice for that hour.
So how do you make a person your meditation practice?
Because they're the object of attention. So it's listening to them deeply, getting curious about what they're saying, is a really integral part of the work that I do as a coach. And really like that exchange, it helps them generally to develop more self-awareness, right? So it's interesting that like the mindfulness that I bring to the coaching relationship, that presence, the curiosity, listening intently, the kindness, right? All of these kind of integral pieces, non-judging awareness. That's another key tenet of being a coach, is non-judgmental towards your clients. Yeah. All of those things are this fertile ground that, sort of, I don't like the word allows, but gives space for the client to hear their thoughts more clearly, like whatever is rummaging around, over and over again, to be able to verbalize that and speak it out loud and then have it reflected back is really powerful for an individual in developing their own self-awareness.
Yeah. Yes. And I think so first of all, thinking of people as a practice, like I love that. I always say, I'm a good listener, but then, you and I have talked about mindful communication and, we've trained people with that and going like, you might raise your hand going, yeah, I'm a good listener, but are you really listening? Or are you, coming up with your next thought or your next, comment or rebuttal if you're in kind of a heated discussion? And so actually to have that, and I would say, anyone could do this. You don't have to be a coach to bring this into your life to say, okay, I'm going to set aside the phone. I'm just going to be here and be paying attention. And, I've been with Charlie for 20 years now, and it can be easy, especially in long-term relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship, to I know what they're going to say next, right? But we actually really don't. And can we pause long enough to be maybe surprised? Because that is also part of mindfulness, or that, attribute is bringing that beginner's mind. And so even if you've been with someone for years and years and years, that moment that you're in is a very new moment. And what is possible if you listen from that point of view? I'll often do a mini practice. I guess now I'm going to call it a meditation practice. But when Charlie and I are talking, sometimes I'll actually think to myself, if this was a first or second or third date, as we're just getting to know each other, would I be ready to bite his head off about whatever I think he's going to say? Or would I be like, oh, that's interesting. Where is this going to go? And then obviously allow it to, develop and come out and have that conversation. But I think that practice of being present for anyone, what would you say is a key thing that you do? Like you must find your mind wandering or wanting to think of something. So how do you come back to mindfulness and being present with another person?
For me, it's coming back to my body or my breath. So bringing my attention into my feet helps me come back to this moment. So I find my mind wandering. Um, Especially I used to sit in a lot of meetings at one of my roles at UNR, and like way too many meetings. And it was really hard to stay present.
Yeah.
And so I'd find my attention drifting, and then anchoring my attention back to my feet would help bring me back into the room. And then also just taking a few deep breaths, especially in those moments where I'm feeling agitated by something, the individual or, something they're saying, there's agitation arising in me, or I'm even feeling hurt in some way.
Mm.
Then it's just like pausing to take a breath. And I even will put my hand on my heart because that helps to calm me. But just, whew, okay, take a breath. Here we are. I can be with this, right? And it's that cultivating the ability to be with what's right here too.
Yes. Yes. And that is then, I specifically asked you about work, but what you're saying is just like every day. Like this is, and I think I titled this Mindful Living or Living Mindfully, something like that. That's the episode title. And so it really is wanting to help kind of distill it down to like, what does it look like in my workday? We often think of meditation as, that sitting on the mountaintop and in, the crisscross position. And so people will say to me, one of the biggest barriers is they'll say, well, I can't practice because I have, I don't have 20 minutes. I don't have this or that. And I think we talked a little bit about it, but you came to mindfulness when you were a new mom. And someone said something to you about a mindfulness practice being a young mom. So if there's anyone listening who is doing maybe care, like how does that come into it if you're like feeling pulled in so many directions?
Yeah, I think what I had shared was that I was feeling agitated, that I would sit down to practice, and then like no matter what time I did it, it's like it was a bell for my son to wake up. I was just like, are you kidding me? Like this, how is this like, no matter what time I tried, like, it's like, okay, he's awake. So I was talking with my meditation teacher at the time about it. And so she invited me to think of his crying as the bell of awareness, or his mama, right? Ready to get out of bed. And so that was such a helpful distinction, like that he wasn't like a distraction from my meditation practice. He is my meditation practice.
Yeah. So that can be work, that can be, dealing with really anything in your life. Like this is the practice. Which I will say, for people who maybe are starting meditation or just developing their practice, there's a saying that, we sit in formal meditation, not to become really good meditators, but so that we can meet the rest of our lives with more ease. I'm paraphrasing. So there is something to be said with setting aside that time, if you're able to say, okay, I'm going to focus on an object of attention. You used that phrase earlier, and great objects of attentions are the breath, the body. You could focus on hands and feet, which are great, places of sensation, air temperature, sound. What are other? Did I name all of them? Object of attentions, or just your posture, whatever. I heard someone say the seat, the feet, and the something else. And I remember seat and feet. So if you are wanting to start a practice, yes, set aside that dedicated time, but know that in your life, these interruptions are also an opportunity to do that. There's one that you and I have talked about with communication where, if you're reaching for your phone, maybe just pausing and taking that breath and saying like, okay, why am I reaching for my phone? And getting curious about that again, non-judgmentally, because then it always comes back to that next level of, just allowing your everyday situation to unfold.
I,
Yeah.
Last night I was giving a guest lecture, and I started the guest lecture by introducing a mindfulness practice. So this is a group of college students.
Okay.
And when I stepped into the room, there's laptops, there's technology everywhere. And I was like, oh man, I'm just going to sit here and talk to screens. Like, so I started with a meditation practice and invited them into presence for the time that we were together, right? And asked for people to share their experience, what they noticed afterwards, right? And one of the students shared that, that he can't meditate because all he felt was anxiousness. And so I was like, so I explained to him, and that can be, there's these common kind of misnomers that people have, like, I can't meditate because of XYZ. But he clearly described his experience. So, I could feel the anxiety in my chest. And I was aware that I'm really anxious because I have this test tomorrow. And, he clearly outlined his experience. And so I reframed it or just shared, like, that's meditation. It isn't, there's this like thing out there, like if I'm not relaxed or feeling peaceful or calm after I'm done meditating, then, I haven't done it right or correctly. And so that is not the case, as you and I both know, that becoming aware and sitting with ourselves as we are in this moment with kindness, with acceptance or acknowledgement, maybe it's just acknowledgement, is foundational to the practice, and is what you're sitting with and paying attention or tapping into whatever's already there. Yes. Another gal said she felt more stressed when meditating because all she thought about was all of her to-dos. And she just felt like she was more stressed because she was focusing on her to-dos.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes. And just seeing, like, where does the mind go when there's stillness? And we have so much input and so much ability to distract and numb and, kind of check out of like what's actually happening, that it is hard to be with that. I saw a comedian recently talking about, growing up in the 80s or whatever. And he said, we didn't hear mindfulness being talked about because we just were mindful. We didn't have these computers in our pocket. Like, if you're on the bus, you watch condensation like drip down the window. And I'm like, I remember doing that. And I'd be like, ooh, this one's going to win. It'd be like a little race I'd make up in my mind. And so we have this capacity to distract. So then we actually have to make a choice to be with what's here. And it can feel very uncomfortable, as those students pointed out, that, okay, so I'm quiet for a minute. I see that, I have so much to do, or I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm replaying a conversation from third grade and wished I would have said something different. And, instead of in like bringing that compassion and understanding to that moment is the power of meditation, is the power of living mindfully. It's not about being perfect and having this perfect practice. I mean, I've had some meditations that are like, oh my God, that's amazing. How did I tap into it? And then others are just like, what is happening? And I think that, and that's life too, right? There's amazing moments, there's hard moments, and it's just what's here over and over again.
Yeah, it's that ability to sit with what's here. And I think underlying some of what we're talking about here, I'm aware of, listening to you speak, is how challenging mindfulness is in our technology based world. I mean, technology is wonderful in this instance, right? Here we are connecting in Minnesota and Nevada. And we get to see each other's faces. And I love that, right? And I get to connect with people all over the world through Zoom, which is so cool. And it does make it really challenging to be present with ourselves if we don't set a time aside, intentional practice. The blog that I was working on this morning is about our state health improvement plan. And so there's a ton of stats in there about mental health and substance use, and one of them being children's mental health. And it is a huge concern that, along with death by suicide, for these young humans.
Mm.
And it just makes my heart ache. And I found myself wondering this morning, like, what is going on here? Like, what is happening in our world? And there's a multitude of things happening in our world. We won't go everywhere, but I often do wonder, like, how much technology impacts that piece.
Yeah.
Because it makes it harder to connect with humans. You see kids texting each other in the same space.
Yes.
Or, this, but like I had a student once say to me, "You give me too good of eye contact and make me uncomfortable." And I I was simply trying to listen to what she was trying to say, right? And
Yeah.
so it's going to be really interesting. We live in this giant human experiment as technology continues to shape our world. And so how we mindfully have a relationship with our technology is something that I still kind of wrestle with.
Yes. I mean, this is, again, this awareness, or I have a meditation practice, and yet I can pick up my phone, and I have done this more than once, to check the weather. And 20 minutes later, I have not checked the weather, but I've checked my email. I've been looking at, Instagram or whatever has taken my attention. And then I'll look up and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I still didn't check the weather. And so I'm wondering, as people are listening to this, maybe for themselves, like paying attention, like how many times are you just like gone? And then without judgment, because then you could beat yourself up about it. But that idea of, and I mean, I put, this, but I put like little things on my phone, like a reminder, like, hey, you've been on this for 30 minutes, do you want to get off? And many times I'll just be like, oh, go away, but there is something that's hitting the back of my brain, like, okay, yeah, you should. Now I've been setting timers for myself. Like I'll set a 10-minute timer, and then the timer goes off and it's like, okay, finish up. So there's ways to build that in. Again, I love how you called it a human experiment, because we are, and that takes the sting out of it. Because a lot of people can say like, well, back in my day, like we didn't have this, and those are factually accurate. But in today's world, yeah, we want to embrace, there's challenges and there's benefits. And so how do you navigate that, with being in and of this human experiment and taking care of yourself? Because I would say, I mean, as you were talking, I was like, so you said to that student, like, okay, that's mindfulness. And I know people, I won't name names, who would be like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel anxious. I don't want to realize how far behind I am. So why do I want to bring awareness to my life? So why are we even advocating for this?
This is where I love teaching about the nervous system and the stress response, because, if someone is experiencing chronic stress and high amounts of stress, which the latest stress data indicates, over half of Americans are experiencing significant amounts of stress on a daily basis. So from a nervous system response or a nervous system perspective, if I'm not calm, cool, and collected, and I am really anxious, it actually might not be skillful for me to practice meditation in that moment.
Okay.
And so I tend to start meditation practices, as you know, in mindfulness and strict mindfulness. You don't actually change the breath, you're paying attention to the breath on purpose. But when I'm introducing meditation practices to people, I generally start with a few deep breaths or different types of breathing practices to calm the nervous system just a little to make it more tolerable to
Mm.
sit. And then also giving people agency. So if it feels overwhelming to you, stop. That's okay.
Yes, yes, yes,
You get to choose.
yes.
And so when I'm introducing a practice, I'll even say, like, you don't have to practice. You have agency. You choose if you want to do this or not, to try this out, right, as an experiment. Um, so those are two big pieces. And then I guess the piece on why I advocate for it, because I want to sit with the discomfort. I want to sit with the anxiety or the sadness or the stress. Because what I love about mindfulness and some of the teachings around mindfulness is impermanence.
Mm.
And so that everything changes. So if we can like really get curious and pay attention to the nuances of how things are shifting, nothing is ever the same, right? It can
Mm.
feel so overwhelming, but if we actually get curious, we can ride that wave and then see the changes as they move through time. And it feels a lot less personal when we're
Yes.
able to sit with it. And I appreciate that I am able to sit with myself more, right? I'm able
Mhm.
to include more of my experiences in my awareness. I'm able to just kind of allow them to be there as I continue to practice, right? A decade later, here I am practicing. And I do feel more resourced in so many ways.
Yeah, and so resourced, just say what do you mean by resource? Just that you have
It's really I guess I feel more solidly connected to who
mm,
I am. So I come from a lovely long line of people pleasers. And and meditation or my mindfulness practice helps me to get more in touch with my own feelings, my own needs. And this is as you know, we talked a lot about this, right? This is continual kind of work for me in my life as this human being today. And and so I'll notice myself like leaning in, wanting to fix things, wanting to
mm,
appease, wanting to accommodate,
mm, mm,
wanting to smooth things over, all of these things that I learned going back to the beginning of our conversation with attachment, all of these things that I learned as a child, how they've impacted me as an adult. And where I am today is I just want to authentically be me.
mm.
And mindfulness really gives me that ability. That's what I feel. That I guess that's what I mean about feeling more
It's like
resourced.
an access point. You know,
Mhm.
it's what I have been paying attention to is or what I invite for myself. And then also when I lead meditation, I invite it to be like you're sitting across from a dear friend, but you're sitting with yourself. You're giving yourself that kind attention and curiosity and interest. And, and we also said this at the beginning, we can look externally for these ways to validate, yes, I'm doing a good job. Yes, I'm not a bad person, however that is. But it's, when you sit with yourself and you can actually be like, yeah, here's these impermanent thoughts. I don't have to be led around by them. I don't have to see them as like facts and, I need to act on this right away. It's like, oh, that's interesting. My first retreat, what I noticed in my people pleasing world. So silent retreat, you are silent and, like you are not communicating with people and you're even supposed to have modesty of gaze. So you're not making eye contact because we can say so much with our eyes. And so what I noticed on that first retreat was how often I wanted to engage. get someone a glass of water, get someone a tissue, get someone this. I remember thinking like, oh, like I didn't like something on my plate, because it's usually buffet style. So I didn't like something on my plate. I was hungry, but I was, I had that whole like, well, eat what's on your plate and don't waste. And people, and I was like, I can't communicate to anybody that, thank you. I really appreciate all that you did, but I'm going to choose something else. I actually just had to choose for myself in that moment. And it was liberating to see and feel like how many times I'm not just like outward, like, how can I help you, but outward, like, how can I be so that I'm not impacting you negatively? I don't know if you ever went at Spirit Rock, there's like a little grove where people seem to leave mementos maybe of loved ones. And I was sitting there and I was crying, and because it was so moving and people were coming down the trail, and I had that initial thought of like, okay, I shouldn't cry. And I was like, oh, we're not interacting. I don't have to make them feel okay about the fact that I'm having an emotion, which then that goes back to the attachment. So I will really do recommend people go to that episode, because it is an interesting, I didn't have the attachment lens in that moment, but I'm having a feeling, and to just be okay with that feeling without thinking like, oh, I'm going to bum someone out, or I need to make someone feel better. And so I think that's this idea of like getting to know yourself, that why we sit with the discomfort, because the discomfort's there.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we're, shoving it down, then it comes out and leaks out in different ways, right? Like it's there. And also it doesn't last as long, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I talked to you, last week, and I didn't feel well. And you were lovely to just sit with me and say, okay, like, let's just be together. And that's a gift that I know that you give to your clients. And thankfully I get the benefit of that as well as your friend. And where was I going to go with that? And at the time, I was beating myself up for not handling things well. And then, now that I'm physically feeling better, my cold is gone. I'm like, oh, okay. So I have some spaciousness. But in that moment, I think, well, I just can't, I think some
Mm-hmm.
thought about myself that, I'm awful and I will always be awful, or, I feel bad and I will always feel bad. And it's like, no. And that's the beauty of it. And even in those then joyful moments too, I would say that, being real present with joy, is another challenging aspect.
Well, and I think when we're sick or tired or stressed, it's almost like we have like the little horse blinders on,
Mm,
help it with the flies. Um, and so like the world just seems so small in
yeah.
those moments. And then when we actually feel well, those horse blinders come off and it's like, oh, there's a whole, there's
Yes.
this expansion, right? That happens in the chest, it happens in the heart.
Yes.
And the world, there feels like there's more possibilities,
Yeah.
which is what we find as we practice mindfulness is the more possibilities. And I guess the other part I want to say is about like the acknowledging, the accepting, but then with practice, like we could learn that kindness that we
Mm,
develop for ourselves. We learn to listen to what's called for right now. Right. This is a question that I often will ask myself. Okay, what's called for right now? Maybe it's a nap. Maybe
mm,
it's I need to go get on my bike. Maybe it's, it's XYZ. I need a cup of tea or whatever it is. But we can learn to A, identify what we need, B, listen to our body, our heart, our mind,
mm.
whatever it is that we're paying attention to. And then there's that honoring piece. And that's the next level piece is is honoring what our needs are and then being
Yeah.
able to take action, right? If that's taking action by asking another human for our needs to be met in some way, or if it's doing it for ourselves,
Yeah.
is that next level.
Yes. And then that goes, all roads lead to attachment there. No, but I mean, today it's really on the top of my mind. No surprise there. But that there was a piece in the episode that really struck me about like, when you have your needs that aren't met, then you start doubting that your needs are valid or whatever. And so that, so honoring and what's called for, that was a concept that took me years. I am just now nibbling at the edges of trusting myself to say what's called for next. Because if it is a nap, that goes against so much conditioning for myself. If it is, a cup of tea, oh well, I'm already upstairs and I'm in the middle of work, and but by doing then those actions, so if you have that thought come in, cup of tea, and you're like, oh, I'm worth the effort. I'm worth the effort to go downstairs and start the kettle and have a cup of tea. And so then that starts affirming your needs, that internal. And I've had people say to me, and I've said it myself, well, if left to my own devices, I will just go off the rails. I will just, be.
I've heard you say that.
Yeah, you have. But that's almost that is almost this idea of, for me, that just came up this week, that mentality of the F it, or the, like, I'm just going to go and just, do whatever. I was like, oh, that's like my inner teenager going like, I'm going to push. I don't deserve something and I'm going to push it away. I'm going to push it away. But then just keep coming back and going like, yeah, even if you eat a bag of chips, you're still lovable, you're still worthy. And, that is like some deep, not easy work. So it is, I like that you said that it was next level because it really is. But I think that that's the thing, is that if someone is hearing us talk about this and they're like, well, I can't trust myself. It's like, well, it's like any relationship. You have to build trust. You don't just walk into any new relationship. And if you've been so disconnected from your own experience, that's building a relationship. You are then creating relationship with yourself, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm. And it also makes me think of safety. As you know, safety is a big word for me. There's the psychological safety, there's physical safety, there's a lot wrapped up in safety. And I was at a thing this weekend, and the person who was leading it said, and everyone is safe here. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, you can't just say you're safe. So like trust actually comes first with safety, right? Which actually comes back to the attachment piece and feeling safe as a child.
Yes.
And so, like, what do we need? Like, this is a big question for anyone listening. Like, what do you need to feel safe?
Mm.
What is required to feel safe?
Wow. Yes. And I would say, we're living, most of us, many of us are, housed and have means and food on the table, thankfully. And so it can be this like, well, safe. Like, of course, we're all safe. Like, we're physically safe. There's places in the world that aren't physically safe. But that psychological safety piece, I think we gloss over, and then we think, oh, well, that's being, too precious, or, however that is. But it's a big piece. So are you saying safety comes first and then trust? Because then it's trust that you're safe to ask for your needs met, you're safe to meet your needs, like all of those things.
I'm not sure if I don't know if there's like a linear progression.
Chicken and the egg.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is. To me, it makes sense. Like, even just thinking about like having our basic needs met to be able to do some of the, even to reach our purpose.
Mm.
We have to feel safe, right? We have to have these basic needs met. So I would think that safety comes before trust. But maybe it's even just like having some sort of, I think it goes back to that relationship. We have to get to know ourselves
Mhm.
first.
Yeah. Yes. To trust that if left to your own devices, you're not just going to go off the rails. I mean, earlier this week, I don't know what day it's Wednesday. Anyways, but earlier this week, I was just like, oh, I'm going to go for a walk. Like, and it was like a non starter. Like it wasn't like, oh, I should go for a walk. I have to go for a walk. I ate this, so then I must, burn off the whatever. I'm done with all of that. But to the joy that I was experiencing on that freaking walk was not just like, oh, I'm outside, this is nice, but it was the ease of just like flowing into like, oh, I finished my lunch and then I put my shoes on and then I went for a walk. I
Mhm.
never, well, you know me, like that was not like a easy thing. I mean, there was a lot of, diet culture, and that's a whole different topic, but, wrapped up into that, and so it's like, oh, I can trust that my physical container has some wisdom, and, and it doesn't have to be punitive, and it doesn't have to be a slog, and it can be a choice of just like, oh,
Mm-hmm. And
go
it takes
outside.
years to develop that. It can, right? It
Yes,
takes
yes.
significant amount of time. This isn't like none of the work that you and I do is a quick fix,
Yeah, yeah.
period. Right. And sometimes I feel like it should come with a warning.
Mm.
You might get to be aware of some things that you don't want to be aware of. And that's okay.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah.
And though I would say that there leads to then that breadth and depth of your human experience, because we can stay at the surface level. We know plenty, of people, and I remember, this was years and years ago, but I remember walking by some beautiful lawns. I was on a walk with a friend, and I was like, oh, I wish I was just the type of person who cared about like what my lawn looked like. Not that I don't care, but like that was my main focus. And then I was like, do I really? Like, no, I wouldn't trade the introspection, but I do think that yes, there's a level of like, okay, like, do that non-judgment for whatever is coming up.
Well, and that's something that like as my coaching practice has developed, when I first started out coaching, started out as like a strict health coach focused on behavior change. And it's wonderful. I love doing that work. But as my coaching practice has developed over time, my own personal practice has developed over time. Like I really only want to work with clients who want to go deep at this point.
Mm,
Like
mm-hmm.
I'm not like if you want to stay surface level, I think that's wonderful. You choose, you do you.
Yeah,
But if you are ready to go deep, then that is where like I want to show up for and support
yeah,
people. So I've gotten much more clear on, the type of work that I want to do through my own meditation practice as well. And, as my well, as I've been able to go deeper, I have more space or more capacity to hold that space for another human,
yes.
um, which I love. It's a huge gift and beautiful work.
Yeah, and it's humbling to be trusted at that level,
Mhm.
isn't it? Like to have people just be like, "Yep, here I am, and
Mhm.
here's what I'm dealing with." So that we're kind of coming towards the end. So we won't do a meditation as we kind of talked about, but this conversation was so rich. So when you are that present, then you are, so when you're saying that your capacity gets to be more, that's because separate from your work, separate whatever, you're doing these things to build trust, to build safety, to, meet yourself where you are so that you can then be that present,
Mhm.
so that you're not burning out and getting like taking people's stuff on, because then you can also say, oh, this is yours and I can witness it, but I don't have to hold it or fix it, that people pleasing, that like, I don't have to jump in there and take this away from you.
Yeah, very well said.
So if you were, I always like to leave some action items towards the end, or at the end of every episode. What action item would you invite listeners to do after listening to this episode?
I love this question. My action item is to do nothing. Because, in our world, we get so wrapped up and focused in, okay, what am I going to do next? What's called
Yes.
for, what do I have to do to move forward? That sometimes we forget to allow ourselves to simply be. And when we allow ourselves to simply be, that next right step, action, etc., will emerge, right? That comes from a place of maybe intuition, inner wisdom versus the mind. Yes. So if we think of the action step, I think and the goal setting, it tends to be more of the shoulds. Oh, I should be doing X, Y, Z, versus what is it like for you to stop?
Yes.
Right? Just stop. Take a breath.
Yes. Maybe
Observe
stare out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stare out the window. But actually, I would invite you to come into your body and observe. How are you feeling right now? What physical sensations are present? What is your body saying to you? The body speaks in the language of sensation. What is your body saying? What do you need in this moment? Physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever it is. And then consider taking action, or consider simply being for a little bit longer. I love that. Thank you, Heather, for that action item of being with yourself and sensing and just be into your bodies. Simple, not easy. So please, I'm going to thank everyone for tuning in to Creating Connection with Dr. T. But Heather, where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you or work with you in any way? Sure. So if you'd like to read the blog that I write for the University of Nevada, Reno, or listen to one of our podcasts, you can go to www.cassette, CASAT, ondemand.org, and you'll find all of that information there. Or you can find me on my website, and that is www.heatherhaslem.com. Thank you, Heather. And again, thank you all for tuning in to Creating Connection with Dr. T. I'm really grateful you chose to spend this time with us today. Reach out with any questions or comments, show ideas, and thank you for sharing my show. Join me on the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 Central, and 10 a.m. Pacific. And until then, take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you back here on March 6th, where I'll be talking about aging and internalized ageism and how to bring more curiosity, ease, and joy to that experience. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for listening to Creating Connection with me, Dr. T. You can join me by tuning in on the first and third Wednesdays every month at 10 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com, where we will navigate being human together. Being human means that we all have a body, and we will all experience loss, grief, and aging if we're lucky. Let's join together on this journey of exploration, support, and mutual learning. I love bringing people together, and on Creating Connection, we are a conversation away from understanding another person and, quite frankly, ourselves. For more information, visit ccwithdrt.com.